All right, guys, welcome to Substance. All right, it's exciting. So, this is kind of texturing 2.0. We're going to do some videos because there's a lot of material on Substance, and I want to ease you guys in. With that in mind, we are going to be covering how to get our models into Substance so we can create textures. We're going to kind of do a once-over of like the interface of Substance and how everything works in there. And we're going to cover how to get those materials back into Maya for RenderMan. But before we begin, we kind of want to talk about what we need from Maya and what we're going to be doing in Substance. So the question is, why do we go to Substance? And what Substance really does is it kind of takes that base texturing that we can do using tileable textures in Photoshop and brings it to the next level. So when we get everything done in Photoshop, generally what we're going to have is some like clean, idealized versions of like the perfect cutting board texture for a brand new cutting board. So everything is shiny and new, which if you've looked at any 3D movies with a critical eye, you'll notice that things that look shiny and new look fake. Our human eye just kind of immediately realizes like this was done by a machine. There's no dirt anywhere. So what we're doing with Substance is we're going to take those textures, those clean textures, we're going to take them to the next level. And so we're going to be sort of adding some kind of dirt and grime. We're going to be adding age. We're going to make it look like these things have existed. And we'll talk more about how to create that illusion, how to create that story in some of the future videos. The other addition is that it actually does allow you to texture in 3D. So when you're doing like full-on character work where there's a lot of detail that it's important to see on the 3D model, it's a lot easier to do in Substance where you can actually see the 2D version of the texture and the 3D at the same time. In addition, you can also use image-based lighting from your dome light, just like we do in RenderMan. This whole thing gives you a much better idea of what your texture is going to look like when it's finished, which it's much better to do than kind of guessing at Photoshop, rendering in RenderMan, and coming back. So it's a more refined workflow. We are going to have to go back to RenderMan, and you may have to make some changes and go back and forth, but it's going to minimize that considerably. And the last thing we're going to talk about is channels. So we've already talked this month about your color map, your bump, height, or normal map, however you want to refer to that channel, your specularity, which specularity actually has two channels, your roughness, and your reflectivity, or as we're going to be calling it in Substance, metallic. And you can have more control over these channels in Substance, which is super good, and it really refines your workflow. We'll talk more about that in an additional video as well. But this is why Substance is so awesome and why we're going to be looking at utilizing it for this class. Now, what you need. So what you're going to need is you're going to need an FBX export of your model, which we'll go over in this video, how to get your models ready to go from Maya to Substance. You're also going to need your tileable textures. This process will actually take place after you have completed the majority of Project 7. You'll need your tileable color map. You'll need a tileable bump map if you have it. If you need a roughness map, you'll need that. So for the cutting board, which we're going to do in this video specifically, you're just going to need a tileable color map. So as for tileable texture maps, those should be covered in a different video, and they're definitely covered in most of my QA sessions and Tony's campus lecture archive. Now, if you have a more complicated asset, let's say you have a ceramic tiled floor. Remember, we're creating the cleanest version of that ceramic tiled floor, but that ceramic tiled floor is still going to need a color map, obviously. It's going to need a bump map because even the most clean version of that floor has the holes for the grout and may have some kind of bump in the surface of the tile. And you're going to need a roughness map because the roughness of the grout is specifically a lot different than the roughness of the tile. You may even need a metallic map. So you may need those going in to Substance before we even begin. That's not to say that we couldn't do some of this work starting up in Substance, but for photo source textures, it's typically best to go in with your tileables already created. There are some ways to create textures from the ground up in Substance. Specifically, if we are using metallics, it typically works a little bit easier. However, generally, Rule of thumb is that you want to come in with your tileable photo source textures created in another application, be it Photoshop, Substance Designer, or Substance's bitmap to material. What Substance Painter allows us to do is give it that artistic, handcrafted touch.